Hello and welcome to another edition of the Yellow Jacket Experience. I'm your host, Seth Dussault, the voice of the Yellow Jackets, and joining me is somebody I consider myself very lucky to have gotten to work with for 10 years and still consider a mentor and a friend, Gary Wright, the longtime head ice hockey coach here at AIC. Coach, how you doing?
Good, Seth. Good to be talking to you again.
It's always good to catch up with you, Coach. This is obviously there's a lot of ground to cover with your career. Let's start all the way at the beginning. Proctor Academy, where you went to high school, you played three sports. You played football, you played baseball, you played hockey. What made you decide to go forward with ice hockey out of those three? Because you were a pretty good baseball player, from my knowledge.
Yeah, I would say, in prep school, probably those would be my two biggest sports. I did play, I was a football quarterback, but I think baseball and hockey were probably sports that I was a little bit better at. Well, interestingly, my father was a coach at Proctor, so I grew up. Proctor felt to me like a prep school playland. The rink was 100 yards from our house. My father was the athletic director, but we were the end of the outdoor era, or basically the end of the outdoor era. So we played on natural ice. If the weather was particularly bad, the Everett Arena in Concord, New Hampshire was about 20 minutes away. We had a pretty good deal with them, so that worked. I decided at a fairly young age that hockey was my favorite sport. And even though my father was a hockey coach and a football coach, he didn't really push me either way. And so I skied till I was about 8 or 9 years old. The ski slope was 200 yards from our house. And then I decided sort of on my own at that age that I just, hockey was my favorite sport. As a matter of fact, I have books in my house now that were given to me as a kid that have nothing to do. Well, one of them is football stories, and it says in the front of it, Gary Wright, age 10, hockey. So even when I was doodling, I was always, writing the sport down, that kind of thing. But hockey, all three sports were important to me. That was even more the day of the three sport athlete, but hockey was always my biggest focus, I think, even from a young age.
What was it like playing for your dad? You brought it up that he was your coach at Proctor. What was that like for you?
It was good. My senior year, I played for Chris Norris, who played at Harvard because my parents stopped teaching after 20 years. But it worked out really well, In fact, there was no partiality. He called everybody by their last name on the team, including me. But I never, he never asked me any kind of dirt on my teammates or anything like that. He made it pretty easy. It was a little bit awkward. He called me by my last name, and I did everything I could to not make a mistake and call him Dad. But it was a pretty good experience. It was really a good experience. I think it worked out very well for both of us. But at the same token, by my senior year, when I had an opportunity to play for somebody else, I think that was good for my development as well.
So now I imagine recruiting in the 1970s is probably really different from what it's like now. Yeah. What went into you deciding to go to the University of Vermont to play college hockey? What was it like being recruited? Was that even really a thing back then?
Yeah, well, it was a thing back then, but not to the level of sophistication as it is now. You know what I'm saying? So I was more or less a walk-on to UVM. Not entirely. They knew I was coming, that sort of thing. But I wasn't specifically recruited. So it was UVM was, obviously I was living in New Hampshire at that time, but then that year, my senior year, that my parents, came over here. So technically that was just when I became a Vermont resident. But I liked UVM. I knew a lot of guys there. They had a really good, emerging program at that time. And so I made that sort of choice. The choice was about the academics, the school, the whole 9 yards. And I was just fortunate that eventually it worked out for me. But there was, I was not in the lineup for really a couple of years there. So it wasn't necessarily a simple journey.
So the head coach at UVM was a man named Jim Cross, who's a legend, not just at UVM, but in college hockey in general, one of the all-time greats, award-winning coach. What was playing for him like?
Well, it was great. He was an interesting guy. As I've written about, he was a sailor, a classical music buff, some different sort of eclectic interests, of that nature. Bird watcher. Um, he was, a good coach to play for. Pretty intense, pretty fair. Um, I had a good relationship with him, even though he didn't always play me. But I've sort of learned that, I guess maybe because my father was a coach, I sort of, appreciated a coach's position and didn't let that get into, affect my attitude if I wasn't always on the ice. But you're right, he was very much a legend, very successful guy. And about 2 years ago, they have that Legends in the Game, the Hobie Baker, not the Hobie Baker Award for the Heisman, like, you know, um, athlete, that kind of thing. But he did receive that a couple of years ago, which was pretty neat. And I think the biggest thing with him, Seth, and I didn't know it at the time, but he really, I wouldn't say pushed me towards coaching, but encouraged it greatly. And that's how I got the job at Rice, and that's how I got the job at Maine. So it was all him. So I guess maybe he didn't see as much about me as a player, but I think he always thought I would be somebody that might be become a candidate to coach.
And you won the coaches award your senior year from the team. What did that mean to you, getting something like that from a guy, like you said, a guy who didn't always have you in the lineup, but recognized the value that you could bring?
Yeah, Seth, you don't miss much, do you?
Nope.
No, I got the coaches award, and then after he retired, which is about, I think, about 8 years after I graduated, it became, the award was named after him. It was pretty special, getting that, and obviously, even though he did, I wasn't a great player, he must have seen some things in me that thought I was, worthy of that trophy, and it was kind of cool to receive it at the time, and it probably even means more to me now because his name is on it,
It's certainly really always special to get an award that's named after somebody who's important to you. We'll get to that later. But you brought up your coaching career. You brought up your time at Rice Memorial. Rice Prep Academy, whatever it's called, and now University of Vermont as well, or University of Maine, excuse me. So what made you decide, obviously coach pushed you, but what made you decide that you wanted to get into coaching?
Well, I wasn't sure if I wanted to get into coaching, even though I love the game and even though my father was a coach. What got me most directly into coaching is, again, my coach when I was coaching at Rice, because Rice is right in, it's half a mile from the UVM campus, and it's a Catholic school. It's kind of like Cathedral in Springfield. Mm-hmm. And what got me into coaching is Cross approached me and said they had an opening at Rice High School, and would I be interested? And I said, well, I'll think about it. And he said, well, you don't have much time to think about it because they're down to 4 candidates. They're not completely sure about them or if they want to go with those guys. And he has a lot of influence in the area. And specifically, he had a lot of guys coaching at different high schools back then. So that's kind of how I ended up. I was working at the YMCA in Burlington, and I was able to synchronize my YMCA position and the Rice position, and it was basically Cross that encouraged me to. I don't know if I ever would have or not. I'm not sure.
So you spend 3 years, if my memory serves me right. You end up getting to the state championship game. What was it like getting to kind of to that level, to reach a championship game like that, as such a young coach?
Well, I mean, it was a nice experience for sure. It was a good experience for the kids too, because it was played at Gutterson, before a pretty big crowd. So I mean, it was a nice accomplishment. We had a really strong line that year that might have been probably the best in the state, even though BFA, that's where Toby Ducalon and John LeClaire played, that kind of thing. But it was really satisfying and I still keep in touch with some of those guys to this day, not necessarily on a regular basis, but now that I'm a Vermont anyhow.
So you get the job at Maine, and again, you mentioned Coach Cross as an influence on that. What was the experience like coaching at the collegiate level? Your first collegiate coaching job. Maybe what's the most important thing you learned in your time at Maine?
Yeah, well, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go to Maine. And again, Cross
Hmm.
encouraged it, and I ended up playing for Jack Semler, who is in the University of Vermont Hall of Fame. I guess it's a critical time, as an assistant coach. When I think you're going to be a better head coach if you've been an assistant coach, you've been in those shoes. You're going to know how to handle and hopefully develop your assistant coaches as well. So it was a good experience. I was there 5 years, and I like the people. Bangor, Maine's not that much different than Vermont, which is where I was based, or even where I went to prep school in New Hampshire, which is smaller rural areas. But I think it was important to my development in different ways, and obviously, learning to be an assistant and working for a head coach, I think was maybe the most valuable, because it's really the only period of which I was ever an assistant coach.
I can't not ask this question, and I know you and I have talked about it. This is more for the sake of everybody else. One of the people you coached while you were at Maine was John Tortorella. What was it like coaching John Tortorella? Was it obvious that he would become an NHL coach someday?
I don't know about that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I will say this, and I've said it to other people before. When we become coaches, we can run our mouths a little bit about how tough we are, or we want toughness in players and resilience and all those kind of things. He walked the walk, and he was, without a doubt, probably one of the most competitive, high compete, just generally tough individual that I ever coached. I write about it a little bit. I just remember him. My office was upstairs next to the head coaches in the Alfond Arena, and he was often coming in and getting the key to the locker room really early. And sometimes he'd get into even for practice a couple hours early and take a nap or whatever in the locker room. But I think what you see now is obviously he was younger, is mostly what we saw back then. But at the same time, a good team.
None of that's really surprising. It sort of makes sense as qualities that you have to be a successful coach. So let's flash forward now to 1984. You've talked about how Maine was the only time you've really been an assistant coach. What made you decide to go for the job at AIC?
Well, a couple of things. Jack Semler retired, and I was pretty clear that I wasn't going to get the head position. I mean, I applied, but I didn't really think I was a candidate per se. And I guess what AIC presented is an opportunity to be a head coach at a school that at the time I wasn't going to have I was going to have competition, but not a whole lot. And one of the things about it was they listed it as part-time. And although that did concern me, it didn't sort of detract me from coaching, from applying. So that's part of the reason I applied, as an opportunity where I thought I had a chance, a little better chance than I might some other places, which might attract a lot more attention. And as it turned out, which was to my benefit, AIC had always had part-time coaches. Some of them were on campus and doing other things, but mostly it was just a lot of guys doing part-time. And my predecessor was just part-time. In fact, I think both of the two before me. So lo and behold, Bob Burke, the athletic director there, had always had it in his mind that, listen, we need to get somebody here on campus full-time, even if they're not compensated full-time by the athletic department. So he got Dean Stevens to combine it with housing and hockey. Stevens said, "I'll do it if I feel comfortable with the candidates you present me with." And I guess that worked out pretty well anyhow. Yeah. Little did I know that I would become that Dean Stevens would be one of the most interesting guys I ever worked with or with for.
Yeah, Dean Stevens was still at AIC when I got there, and certainly one of my favorite people to
Yeah.
work with and talk to. Let's talk a little bit about that. You get the job, but you're also the housing director. What was that like trying to balance that? And also, did you learn anything while you were the housing director that might have helped you with your hockey coaching?
Yeah, I think some of the administrative part, dealing with people. I got to know all the students, scheduling. I did all the scheduling for students' rooms, that kind of thing. And I think one thing that was interesting too. My first year, I didn't even have an assistant, so I get down there, and I'm the hockey coach. I'm the housing director. They didn't even tell me during the interview. They said, "Oh, you're going to be the head resident of Magna as well." And on top of that, I had no assistant. So it was an interesting year. And if anything else, you're asking me what I learned, I probably learned how to multitask. And I ended up doing the housing, I think it was for 7 years. And then fortunately, at least fortunately from my end, and at that time I hired Bruce Johnson, because about 4 or 5 years in, they said, "All right, we'll give you." I didn't even have an assistant housing director at the time, so I hired Johnson, which gave me a little more time, to go on the road, that kind of thing. So he and I were like Mutt and Jeff, sitting next to each other in the housing office.
So, 1990 hockey team at AIC, and you're still the housing director still at this point. If the math is working out, I think it is. You find a way to put it all together. You had Kevin Wortman was part of that team, I believe, who reached the NHL. You win a conference championship. What came together that year? What was so special about that team that allowed it to reach that level of winning a conference title?
Yeah, well, and one thing, getting back to the housing, the biggest thing that probably got me out of housing is when we won that championship. But got a little bit of collateral there. We had really good teams in '88 and '89. In fact, '89 we probably had a better regular record than 1990. But we had a pretty veteran team. When I say that, a junior senior laden team. You talk about, Kevin Wortman was a defenseman and he was player of the year, and Vezio Sacratini, although he left halfway through that '90 year, and then went on and played for Italy in the Olympics as well. But we had Daryl Fournette and Kevin Wortman were two of our. Tony Saracola would probably be the third ring there, and he went on for a long time as a linesman in the NHL. But Wortman and Fournette were both player of the year in successive years, and they're on the same team and they're on the same power play. And then we had some other guys, Ken Mafia and Peter Morris and those. We actually, as I said, we had a better year in '89, but '90 we were sort of struggling actually during the second semester, and we made a goaltending switch, which certainly helped, but it wasn't everything. And we just sort of clicked down the stretch and came up here to Middlebury, which the rink is 2.5 miles from where I sit right now, and I won that championship.
If my memory serves me right, too, it was a wild game. I think 8-6, something like that.
Yeah, if you look at games back in the '80s, I think in the NHL too, right, Seth?
Yeah,
they're a little higher scoring. You know what I'm saying?
For
one thing, a lot higher scoring. Goalies yeah, it was a wild game, and a freshman for them named Craig had 4 goals, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, wow.
But it was kind of a back and forth. We were kind of a high octane offense. I think our power play clicked at around 35, 36 that year. But yes, and we had a really good rivalry. I mean, it was really fun for me. I mean, you got to think here that I'm coming right back to Andover, New Hampshire, where Proctor was, and the Middlebury, Vermont area here would be my 2 hometowns. So it was pretty cool to come back up to Middlebury for that weekend.
Yeah, to win a championship basically at home in front of your family. It's got to
And
be.
you've had a little. I mean, those 1990 guys, the guys from that team have hung pretty tight with each other, wouldn't you say? And I think you've dealt with them some as well.
Yeah, I've gotten to know a lot of those guys. Bill Teggart comes to mind, as somebody who was on that part of that team that I talked to on a fairly regular basis. Yeah, it's a really special group. Donnie Morehouse was your assistant coach at that point, wasn't he?
Yeah, we called him Coach Morehouse in part because he didn't necessarily look like a coach. He had a kind of a, I don't know, what's that hairstyle with your hair's mullet? I don't know, something like that. And he, I always said it was Beatle boots he wore, and of course he was a big music guy as well.
It still
And
is.
then Larry O'Donnell, was with us, and Larry was a big part of that, all that recruiting, the whole 9 yards as well.
Mhm. I'm going to skip ahead again. We're going to jump forward 8 years. 1998. Division II hockey is sort of going away. What went into getting AIC's program to jump to Division I, forming the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference for hockey, all like that whole process? What was that like?
Well, it was interesting. I think the biggest byproduct of the whole thing is that the NCAA had been slowly gravitating to, our league was a marriage of convenience. The ECAC East. We had Division III schools. We had Holy Cross and Yukon, who were Division I schools. We had ourselves at St. A's, who were Division II schools, and it was kind of as I said, a marriage of convenience there. But the NCAA had been more at the NCAA level. They were allowing, they were trying to get the league sort of segmented into their own classification and not have all that other stuff going on. So that was a big part of it. And the league that we were in, there were some Division III schools that wanted to continue to include us, and there were some that not so much. And Jack McDonald, who was the Quinnipiac, played a level below us at the time. And Jack McDonald, who was the athletic director there, is really the one who put that whole MAC conference together. And then all of a sudden, there was, and I think the key too for that is that our athletic director Bob Burke at the time said, if we're going to get in that, we might want to get in it now because we're not as big a name a school as some are. Like an Army or a Yukon or whatever, that there might become a time when. So anyhow, he was very forward looking on that, and so wasn't. He had a big influence in that respect on Harry Corniotis, the president at the time.
Yeah.
And Corniotis said, "Well, we can go there, but we're not going to be willing to spend a whole lot more money, if you understand what I'm saying."
Yep.
So that's how it happened, and it obviously worked out pretty well for us. That league, that we would have probably been able to remain for a few more years, maybe in the ECAC East, but eventually, as everything came to pass with the NCAA, that wasn't gonna. You can go up a little bit, like 3 schools play up, but probably our vitality in that league probably wasn't going to last too much longer, and we were fortunate to get in there, I think, quickly, to make sure we had a spot.
And your first year Division I, you end up winning Coach of the Year. What was that like for you getting a coach? I know you're the last person to want to talk about an award that you won, but that still has to be special to get the first one.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, it is a little bit, but it's nice. Again, it's a team coaching staff thing. But that kind of recognition is always good for the program too,
And then 5 years later, you're doing it again because Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, which was and is an all sport conference. A couple schools decide to drop their hockey program. I think Canisius was the only school left in the conference that was a member of the MAC that had hockey. Everybody else was an associate.
There were 3 schools, but you're right, 2 dropped it.
Fairfield and Iona, if I'm remembering.
Fairfield and Iona,
programs. Yep. So you're left with 1 actual member. And so Atlantic hockey becomes a thing. What was that process like to started, obviously you had the teams because everybody just moved over, but what was it like, searching for a commissioner, figuring out a name, figuring out how we're going to do this? What was that process like?
Well, it was a pretty smooth transition. And actually the MAC, probably, the commissioner there, probably more than any other, because he was on I think it's called the Management Council in the NCAA, was responsible for the NCAAs going from 12 teams to 16 teams. You know what I'm saying? And the MAC is a Division I conference, and it was very well run. I mean, the league was well run, but it was a pretty smooth transition. It worked out really well with the Atlantic Hockey, and I think it was partly at a point, that, as you say, there were 3 MAC conference teams in our league. And when 2 of them dropped hockey and then there was only Canisius left, I think the writing was kind of on the wall. And I think that the MAC, as far as I know, I wasn't behind the scenes with that, but I don't think they were that excited about, continuing with it, although I don't know that for sure. So it worked out really well. Bob DiGregorio had been with Atlantic, with the Northeast 10, had been an AD at Merrimack, had been the commissioner of hockey at one point. So that's how that came about. But it wasn't quite the news of when we first became Division I, or all of us did with MAC, with the MAC.
And certainly that makes sense that it would be an easier transition just to move over like that. And of course, what Commissioner DiGregorio has done this will be his 20th and final year, is incredible. So the right choice made there, clearly. During this time, though, you went back to having 2 jobs at AIC, because in 2001, you took over the golf team. What went into that? What was that like?
Well, it was either that or go on the PGA Tour, Seth. But no, I did not apply for it, nor did I volunteer for it. Let me put it that way. And again, Bob Burke asked me if I would become the golf coach, and so I did it for about 5 years. It was kind of fun. I was just picking up golf myself. When I was growing up, my grandmother always used to try to get me to play golf, because she said you can play golf forever, most of your life. It's very social. It's good. You can do business transactions, all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I always told her, well, and then she would say, well, you can't play football, hockey, and baseball forever. This is when I was younger, and I would always say, well, golf is the sissy sport. Of course, when I picked it up, it's the hardest sport I've ever had to play. So when I was the van driver, Seth, for sure, and I maybe imparted a few philosophical things, and I could occasionally make pointers, but I was far from an official swing coach, that kind of thing. And we had a few hockey players, but it was interesting. And one of the interesting things about the golf, there were several other golf coaches that were on the hockey side, mostly 3. But those are all guys that I had coached against in ECAC East. Jack Arena at Amherst, Bill Beanie at Middlebury, some of those guys. So the funny thing is, we go to these tournaments, and sometimes you'd walk out, on the course and check out your guys, watch them for a few holes, that sort of thing. But there was a lot of downtime too, so we'd always be in the clubhouse talking hockey, all us golf coaches.
So you were definitely a hockey coach that just happened to be coaching golf.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. You're not going to offend me by that statement. I think it's quite accurate. But it was a good experience. And one thing that was interesting about it, Seth, is I remember Mike Gilligan. One of the few Division I guys, besides me at that time, that was also the golf coach, was Mike Gilligan at UVM. He did make one interesting statement. He said, "You, except for the fact it's a shorter season of golf, otherwise." Other than that, the fact that obviously, hockey's a longer season, you're spending more time with your guys. But he said, in some respect, you're going to get to know them every bit as well, if not better. Because you think about it, every time you go into a restaurant, you're at one table, a small table with 6 golfers.
Yep.
In the van, they're right there behind you. They're not the back row. of a bus, however many rows back. So it was interesting in that respect that you did spend a lot of time, in sort of close proximity to your players.
Now, one thing, because we're getting now to the point where I'm actually at AIC at this point in the chronology, and one thing that you always made a point of was never being afraid to play anybody. I remember we had UMass on the schedule, we had Michigan State, Penn State once they came in, Quinnipiac, big name opponent. Every year you had three or four big time, big name opponents. What value did you see in having a small program like AIC take on the big boys of college hockey?
Yeah, well, one thing that Larry O'Donnell always said, about me, which I kind of appreciated it. He used to say that I wasn't afraid to lose. I don't like losing, but I wasn't afraid to lose. I just thought that some of those schools, were a small school, in Springfield, and it was just this was the experience. I remember I think it was Matt Cassidy said in the school newspaper, the Yellow Jacket, after we played at Michigan, that he felt that was the perfect college hockey experience. There's others, obvious. But I thought it was the experience, and obviously the opportunity. If you could ever pick one of those guys off, it would be pretty good for us too, But it was a real taste of the big time, and we were kind of, playing in it. We were at the dance, so to speak. And I thought a lot of it just came down to the experience. It was kind of cool to say, we're American, and I'm sure that Eric feels the same way. Obviously they've done better than we did. But it was pretty cool to go and play some of those schools. In fact, you mentioned that. So we played at RPI in their tournament, I don't know, 12 years ago, whatever it was. And if we had won that game with RPI, I think it ended in a shootout. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, it was a tie, 4-4 tie, and then went to
a tie. Yeah,
shootout.
Exactly. And so anyhow, the point I'm making is, if we had won, we would have played Notre Dame. And in the publicity office at AIC, they were ready to send a guy out with a camera to start taking lots of pictures to get AIC playing Notre Dame. We never got to that point. But so much of it, I think, was the experience, and they all, and the other thing is, Seth, they all gave pretty good guarantees, which didn't hurt us either,
Yeah, you certainly can't argue with that. I remember the trip to Michigan. That was an unbelievable time. Just seeing the crowd, the way it was, being on that campus, really definitely special. I remember Austin Orszalak scoring 2 goals in that game, one of those games too.
John O'May assisted on both.
Yep.
Yeah, and Seth, I mean, clearly, you're a guy that is going to just take it in like no other. And remember how we originally were able to take you on the road, right?
I do, with the radio station I remember trying to convince Professor Hughes that we needed to cover road games. And I remember my sophomore year, I'll never forget this. I went into I had always been asking, you go on the road with football, we go on the road with basketball. Why aren't we going with hockey? And we were playing UMass Amherst in 2008. My sophomore year, it was in the fall of 2008. And I went into his office and I was like, this is either going to work or he's going to fire me. And I went in and I said, I remember saying to him, we're playing the University of Massachusetts. We don't have any other games that night. What reason can you give me not to cover this game? And he kind of looked at me funny and he goes, I can't give you a reason. Let's do it. And that was the first one.
Well, there was another piece to the whole thing too, as you know. Rich Bedard at the time said, listen, you can bring Seth on the road. We just can't add another room.
Yeah.
So we had to put you in with players, John Culp had to take one for the team, the whole 9 yards, to get you on the road with us. So we didn't spend any extra money.
Yeah.
I think you ate all your meals with us, so our meal budget might have gone up a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, I must have doubled your meal budget, but but no.
I mean, you were really deserving of it, and it was great for our. It made more sense if we're going to go to if we're going to go on the road like that, even in our own league, we
Mhm.
should have somebody traveling with us. And I think it worked out great, in that respect.
It's certainly, I still remember the first trip to West Point, the playoff game against the 1-0 overtime loss against Holy Cross. So I still have nightmares about that.
Yeah.
But enough about me. Think about all the time that you spent coaching and all the people you've influenced, myself obviously included, but your coaching tree has enough branches to have its own forest. A lot of former players of yours, former assistant coaches of yours are coaching now. 3/4 of the AIC coaching staff this year played for you. 2 of them coached with you as well at AIC. How gratifying is it to see the people that played for you, coached for you, having success in their own way? In particular, what was it like, not this most recent year, but the year before, seeing the Atlantic Hockey Championship game have Eric Lang coach against Trevor Large for that trophy?
Yeah, it's really cool. You know what I'm saying? It was a really nice feeling. I there's different reasons for that. I mean, it was always a little disproportionate to the stature of our program. I mean, you think that, all the national champions and guys in the Frozen Four, that kind of thing, are always going to be the ones, sending off assistants, which makes sense. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think there was a couple things with it starting way back. We didn't have a full-time assistant. I'm trying to remember, maybe I'm trying to remember what year that was. It started with Rich Bedard, so it was 2009, right around in there, that we first had a full-time assistant. We had the same arrangement that I did when I came here in 1985, in terms of the most part. And then Rich added a second assistant. And then when Vince came is when we first had a full-time guy. But one of the factors was that, when we were in Division I, we could hire a gratis, we couldn't hire a full-time guy, which is what we wanted most, or 2 full-time guys, what we wanted most. But we could hire grad assistants. And, I wasn't going to get big name, guys that with all kinds of college experience coming to fly as a grad assistant at AIC, where you got room, basically as if you're getting a full scholarship. So I think we did a pretty good job with that, and a pretty good job with hiring. We got some guys applying that were young and up and coming, but nobody knew they were up and coming at the time. Does that make sense?
Mm.
And a whole slew of them that might not have, barely got a look at a lot of other schools. I'll give you one example of that was Glenn Stewart. So Glenn. Bobby Ferraris is our grad assistant. We only have one at that time, okay? And Bobby says, I got this guy, Glenn Stewart, who I played professionally with, who's really interested in coaching. So we got Glenn a lunch ticket. That was his whole compensation, 5 lunch tickets a week. And then he gets a job out of here. He goes to UConn. He's there a couple of years. And then Merrimack has an opening. And I'm almost positive it was a Saturday morning. I'm in the office, and Mark Dennehy, the Merrimack coach, calls me and he goes, I'm kind of interested in your guy, Glenn Stewart. Can you give me some more information about him? He said, I've got a guy from BC and a guy, I don't know, some 2 or 3 big schools, including all kinds of. I've got all these coaches, and he said, but I like to sort of just look under under rocks, through the cracks, that kind of thing. And that he was kind of doing what we kind of did here, you know what I'm saying, from a coaching standpoint. So anyhow, Glenn got hired there, and the rest is sort of history. But and then it kind of a little bit, people started to realize that even though you have to really sort of pay your dues at AIC, some guys are coming out of there and are doing pretty well. And the other thing it's a big factor too, is they only stayed 2 years. So we had a turnover. Every other year we were looking for somebody, you know what I'm saying? Mm. And so we were churning out a lot of guys. And that was, so I was having an awful lot of people sort of coming through our pipeline. And I guess the only other thing is I tried to be really thorough, in the hiring process, and really sort of look behind the scenes and check a lot of references and that kind of thing. So we were able to get some pretty good guys that, at a very young age that would have been difficult getting them a few years later. So yeah, it's very satisfactory, and very much so.
Especially now, Eric Lang has taken over at AIC, and obviously what he's done, especially in the last 4 years, is I don't even have words for it, which doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
What in particular has it been like seeing someone who was not only your assistant coach, but he was also your captain take over the program and do what he's done?
Yeah, and it come from that. Well, he had one advantage. He came from that real hockey hotbed, the Bronx. But I mean, ironically, with Eric, when he decided to really get into coaching, I kept trying to get him to come back here, like as a, because he was a grad assistant, but then after he was a grad assistant, then when we had the full-time position, I kept trying to get him back, and but the compensation wasn't great. He had other things going on, that sort of thing. And I think if we had been as good as many guys I've had, as many of them done so well, but if 4 or 5 years before I left, I could have got Eric as an assistant, we obviously would have even done better. But very gratifying. I mean, I didn't choose my successor, but they certainly asked me about him, and I had all good stuff to say, obviously. And it's the rest is history, as you say.
It certainly is. And one thing I'll never forget is 2019 when we win the Atlantic Hockey Championship. He comes on for his post game, and he sits down, and he says, "The only thing that I want to say is that this doesn't happen without Gary Wright. Let me get out of the way so you can talk to the players." And that was pretty much it. And it was just always has stuck with me, that response, and how much respect he has for you. Which everybody I've ever talked to about you feels the same way. You've brought up your book because you've brought up writing, and it's actually you're working on, just about done with, your second book, because you wrote a book, Pass the Biscuit, back in the day, and now working on your memoirs. What inspired you the first time around to write Pass the Biscuit, and what made you decide now's the time I'm going to write a bigger, longer book?
Yeah, well, I wrote Pass the Biscuit because I've always enjoyed cooking. Just kidding. No, that one was the subtitle of that. It was Pass the Biscuit, Spirited Practices for Youth Hockey Players and Coaches. I've always had an interest in writing. As you know, my mother published over 20 books during her lifetime, which ended at 94 just a few months ago. So writing has always been an interest of mine. And so I wrote that book. That was before the internet age. We sold about 2,000 copies, which wasn't bad considering the minimal promotion with it. And I just took a lot of drills from some I made up, but as Tim Taylor says, we were all drill pirates. So many of them I just got from other people and hockey camps I worked at. And it was fun. That this second one has been a much bigger undertaking. So anyhow, that came out in 1991, and it was a really good experience. I enjoyed it. I think it was helpful, because really a lot of those drills. I sort of put some sample practices together. It wasn't like this is Gary Wright stuff. Some of it was, but some of it was just from some of the great hockey minds, whether they're big, they're known as college or pro coaches, or some high school coach, or a peewee coach that's a really good coach. So I kind of, my name was on it, but in effect, a lot of people contributed to that.
This year, you've gotten a couple of special honors, this being one of them, but you were named the winner of the John Snooks Kelly Award, service to college hockey in the United States. It comes from the American Hockey Coaches Association. Yeah. Again, I know you're the last person to ever want to talk about an award that you've won. getting something like that, from your peers, people that you coached against and, alongside for a whole career, to be recognized like that, what did it mean to you?
It was nice. I mean, it was really nice. It was probably good for the school, good for, a lot of things. I I guess it was a little bigger deal than I thought it was. I mean, it certainly attracted a lot of attention, and it was interesting going down and speaking in front of former peers in Florida. And it was pretty cool after to get a picture with some of the people from, UVM, and then a couple of my former teammates, and then a picture that you were asking about the other book too, that I wanted to get a picture in this new one, Striding Rough Ice. We'll see how it comes out, but it is published. It comes out in October. But one of the things I wanted for this, even though I had to turn in all the pictures like several months ago, was to see if I could get a picture on stage after that speech with some of my former assistants, and there were 8 of them there, so that was pretty cool, for sure. No, it was appreciated. I think that it's a nice gesture from the American Hockey Coaches Association that they sort of recognize former coaches too, to sort of keep them a little bit in the loop. There was a lot of other guys like Bob Gaudette and stuff that were also award winners there, and it was a little bit cool too that one of the between the men's and the women's side, I think there was like 6 awards, whatever it was. 2 of us from Proctor, Carolyn, who was at Proctor when they won the women's championship, and then at Northeastern and that kind of thing, Carolyn Healy. And so it's kind of neat for the school to have 2 of us. But it was I appreciate it. It comes from one's peers, and it was nice.
You have a lot of hockey memories, and obviously 32 years at AIC. Yeah, I can't certainly ask you about every single game because we would be here for 1,000 years. But what's one memory? And it could be.
I don't know about this. I don't know if I can do it, but go ahead.
Could be during a game, could be after a game, could be anything. What's one thing that like sticks out when you think back as just like an interesting story or something memorable for you as one of, something that AIC that happened over your 32 years that you want to tell about?
Yeah, I don't know, Seth. You probably of all the questions you've asked me today, you probably would have had to give me a day or two to think about that one, to boil it down like that. I mean, beating Quinnipiac in 2012 down there, the ECAC championship, some of those trips that we talked about, and a lot of league games as well. I don't know if I have any. Well, I know what you're asking me, and I'm just not sure if on the spur of the moment that I really have an answer for you there. But I think that one of the things is, and I've been really fortunate to coach an awful lot of players, and I think there's 2 things that hockey's kind of left me with is all the wonderful people that have that touch us along the way, hockey people, other people as well, and the same thing I think goes to the game is played by our players, and it's just a real privilege. To be a part of that.
Absolutely. It is always about the people, and that's always the thing that stuck with me the most. So this is the last question, and this is the one that I ask everybody that has been inducted in this interview series. What was it like for you getting that phone call? Hey, we're putting you in the AIC Hall of Fame.
From Jess.
From Jess.
Recently, it was very nice. It was very nice. I don't, it's not like I have most people in Hall of Fames, I think, have pretty lofty records and stuff. But it's appreciated, and I think it's a reflection of, and getting back to that, so many of people that I've coached along the way, and so it's nice. And AIC is not my direct alma mater like Proctor is or the University of Vermont. But hey, I spent 32 years there. That's a long time, as you know. So I'm proud of it, and I'm proud that to have been associated with AIC.
We are lucky that we got to have you for 32 years and continue to support the program, and unbelievable career. I'm gonna do a PS for yours this February, and it never happened, at least not in the time that I've been at AIC. AIC is playing at Vermont this coming season, and not only are you going to get to see Eric Lang again, Patrick Tabb, Matt Woodard, who all played for you and two of whom coached with you. Steve Weidler, who was one of your assistant coaches, is now coaching at Vermont. How much are you looking forward to that game?
Well, first of all, it's news to me. I didn't know about that. Yeah.
Well, all right.
Yeah.
Well,
even though I am follow AIC and UVM, I think that's really cool. I'll be there. I'm 45 minutes, from here to UVM, and sure, it's really cool. We're playing up here.
Yeah. I remember talking to you, asking you, how come we never play Vermont? You went to UVM. I want to go see Gutterson Arena. And I finally get to go up there. So I'm certainly looking forward to that. But Coach, thank you for this. Thank you for everything these last 15 years that I've been able to know you and learn from you. And not a day goes by that I don't think about something that you've said to me along the way, and that it's not, as applied to my life. All I'm going to say is thank you for everything, for everything you've done for AIC, for everything you've done for me. It's been incredible, and super grateful to you for everything. I don't know that I could, again, it's not often, but I don't know that I could put it into words.
Well, those feelings are returned right your way. I really appreciate that. And it was fun to reminisce on this, and I'll look forward to that coming down, I guess, in October, and then watching that game in AIC Vermont game next winter.
Absolutely, certainly looking forward to it. That is Gary Wright, the longtime AIC hockey coach, and very deservedly going into our Hall of Fame. This has been the Yellow Jacket Experience. Seth Dussault, the voice of the Yellow Jackets. Thanks for tuning in, and keep your eyes peeled. We got more episodes coming up all summer long.